Yes, the Atari Video Computer System, better known simply as the Atari 2600, which premiered the 11th of September 1977 and continues to be the most influential home console, well, ever, really, seeing as how it pioneered the entire market in the first place. Originally retailing for $199 or close to $122 today, it managed to live a considerably long life for a system that was originally thought to only have been for sale for 1 year, being formally discontinued January 1st of 1992, right in the prime of the 16-bit era. Even past its long lifespan, a total of 30 million units have been brought into the homes of many all over the world as of 2004. What's so surprising about the system is the fact that it managed to succeed with having less power than a freaking toaster. Sure, it may have a MOS Technology 6507 processor clocking in at 1.19 MHz. Throughout all of its life, the 2600 only had a total of 128 bytes of RAM. Yes, just bytes, not kilobytes, not megabytes, hell, not even gigabytes, just bytes. But hey, by that point, we had gotten to the moon with less than that. But now, enough of the technicalities. Let's get into looks. From its introduction in 1977, the system itself had its fair share of design changes. But first, we must start at the beginning. The original wood-grain emblazoned 6-switch system came first, and was commonly on market until 1980. It had been designed to look like a piece of stereo equipment that was, on the market at the time. Much like how the NES was to remind people of top-loading VCRs, and the Wii with its modern entertainment center feel. Of course, even if it did work, people liked variety. So, from 1980 to 1982, you could buy a 4-switch version. Why? Well, I don't really know. It still has 6 switches. In fact, it has 7 switches if you count the channel switch, but why are the difficulty switches on the back? Like, I don't see the point here. Anyway, moving forward. Closer to the end of 1982, the Atari 5200 with its broken controllers had already been out for several months, retailing in May of that year. But we're still far from the Atari 2600 Junior, which, with its design cues, certainly seems like it came out around that time. However, this was not the case. So instead, we got what is lovingly known today as the Vader 2600. Seeing as how it was the early 80s, just about everybody liked Star Wars, and the fact that it was completely black. just black, no other colors, and then, the white logo. In which this was the first time that the system had ever even been called the Atari 2600, so there's that. Meanwhile, back in the late 1970s, department store Sears and Roebuck, now just Sears, whether or not they're going out of business is debatable, struck a deal with Atari to make their own system. It was a 2600 with different wood graining and a silver sticker around the switches, and the console could be bought at any Sears and Roebuck from 1977 until 1983. Next, we must travel to the far east and see Atari Japan try to cash in on the console's American success. So, Japan received the Atari 2800. However, it was short-lived, due to 1983 being totally dominated by the Nintendo Famicom. Finally, there was the Atari 2600 Junior, a cost-efficient version of the original system retailing in 1986 when Atari was under Jack Tramiel of Commodore. all the way to the 2600's kill date in 1992. However, there were some other consoles planned. There was the Atari 2700, which was a 2600 with wireless controllers, and certainly looked quite a bit like the Atari 5200. Even its controllers have a similar style, even though the Atari 2600 technically at this point, I believe, did have wireless controllers that you could buy separately, but perhaps they just wanted a different design. There was the Atari CX2000, or VAL as it was nicknamed, which had built-in controllers, which, to be honest, they just look like Atari's old Pong systems, or really any Pong system from the time. Finally, there was the Atari 3200. Okay, we move up 600 and it looks slightly different. Well, slightly different. It looks somewhat like the Atari 8-bit line, but 2600, and it has some weird buttons and the controllers look like those of the Atari 5200, and it was rumored to have a 6502 processor, but was killed off as programmers discovered it was hard to develop for. Then there's the clones. Oh god, this just keeps going, doesn't it? There's the Atari Classics 10-in-1 plug-and-play from Jakks Pacific. The TV Boy series, which was made by too many companies to name. The Atari Flashback series, made by Atari themselves. The recent Retron 77, which plays your cartridge or built-in games in HD. Gotta pick one of those up. And the still upcoming Atari VCS microconsole. And now finally, let's get into some games. Many games were and still are being created for the Atari 2600 since its debut in 1977. A few of the most popular games included Pac-Man, which was a largely unfinished prototype, Pitfall, a masterpiece from programmer David Crane, Asteroids, which is now in color, Missile Command, no rollerball needed here, Space Invaders, which, simple, but good, Demon Attack, a nice change to the Space Invaders formula, and finally, Combat, which came with nearly every system. Seriously, if you don't have Combat in your library of Atari games, ladies and gentlemen, you have been ripped off. And, of course, just for good measure, here are a few of my favorites. Overall, if you're looking for some extremely simple fun, and I mean primitively simple fun, you can search your attic and or basement for one of these. Believe me, someone in your family must have had one. Or you could go to any number of flea markets, or just buy a console online with a whole bunch of games for next to nothing, seeing as how cheap they are. Or perhaps you don't want to spend any money at all. Perhaps you'd rather play all your games on a computer. Well, in this case, emulators most certainly have you covered, and there are a number for the PC. Personally, I recommend Stella, as that's just what I use on my computer, but overall, the Atari 2600 is a pretty primitive system. However, it is most certainly worth your